We have a situation in our world. We have a tendency to invest in various energy production technologies, such as coal and fuel oil burning electrical plants. Because of our for-profit focus in the world and the capitalistic dynamics of our world, organizations have been investing less in coal and fuel production. And this is just information available in the news. If I've got it wrong, please correct me. Because of lack of oil and coal production, China now has a shortage of fuels necessary to run their electrical plants. Therefore, they've turned off electricity to a large portion of their population. And this is whether it's cold or, people could not be able to continue their lives simply due to lack of electricity. Now, a similar situation we're experiencing in the United States, meaning that organizations are shifting from fossil fuels to green technology focuses. Well, that's fantastic. It's not a smooth transformation, it's a shift from one focus to another, which means what's in it for them to transition from one to the other gracefully so that people don't die and so that people have a continuity of electricity in various countries. We would suggest that because of our for-profit myopic focuses within organizations with lack of oversight and orchestration of their activities, their developmental dynamics, that at least in China, they are finding that they can't keep the lights on, literally, simply because of a shift in available fuels. In Taiwan, and we're going through some of that in the United States, meaning we're just barely keeping pace with our coal or fossil fuel burning electrical plants. We barely have enough to keep them going. So this is a situation that is likely to impact many nations in the very near future. In Taiwan, there's a broader discussion here than just coal or fuel oil production of electricity or nuclear production of electricity. It's about how we change, how we transform, how intelligently do we do it, how efficiently, how effectively, how broadly orchestrated is the process of transformation on our planet. And if it's not very orchestrated, will people suffer? So the second item on this list is saying that Taiwan, which is a big maker of computer chips for many purposes, including cars, they haven't been making certain computer chips that were legacy chips that have been the same kind of chip that was originally designed 10 years ago, perhaps, and that are still used in cars. They're well-known products. They're dependable. And the car companies have not wanted to change. If it isn't, they've taken and if it's not broken, don't fix it approach. So Taiwan is shifting their focus and saying, well, we want to invest in new technologies. We want to make the newer, better chips. We don't want to make these old car chips. And so we're not going to do it. And so the car companies aren't able to make cars because they don't have chips. So there's a big negotiation of the supply chain going on. You can't just use a different chip in the car. You have to redesign a whole new chip, ensure that it fits the rest of the electrical system in the car. And you might even be required to change the design of the car in order to make the new chip fit. So there's a whole domino effect that occurs when you change just the computer chips in a car. Benjamin Franklin said it very brilliantly a long time ago when he said a metaphor. For want of a horseshoe nail, the horseshoe was lost. For want of the horseshoe, the horse could not carry the rider. For want of the horse to carry the rider did not get to deliver the message to the battle. For want of the message not being delivered to the battle was lost. And because the battle was lost, the war was lost. So the entire war was lost because there wasn't a horseshoe nail available to a messenger's, a rider of a horse and a messenger that needed that horse to deliver the message. This is the domino effect that is occurring in our world, and which will just be ever more the case in the future. And if we don't understand these supply chains and these domino effects well enough and manage them gracefully, intelligently, wisely, and in a disciplined way, and not in a self-interested, egoistic, or greedy, profit-driven motive sort of way, if we don't bring consciousness to that process, people will die. People will suffer. Products will not get made. Services will not be rendered. Resources will not be available. And if we don't understand that and don't manage all of that better, how are we going to transform the world into a sustainable life process that is in harmony with the natural world? So supply chain elements, you might have 10 or 20 or 100 organizations that all interoperate in a synchronized way in order to produce any product, such as a car, a vacuum cleaner, a television, or a computer. And if every one of those sub-elements of the supply chain are operating from a what's in it for me point of view and self-interest and profit-driven view, and there's no orchestrating mechanism, there's no conductor for that orchestra that has overarching purview on all the different pieces of that chain, then one of the links in the chain can break. And if one of the links in the chain breaks, the chain is broken. That's how fragile our current world is. You see these dynamics in the COVID-19 inadequate response. The process of producing immunizations was woefully inadequate. The process of distributing immunizations was woefully adequate. It is and still is woefully unfair. The haves are getting the immunizations, the poor are not. And what if self-interest, justifiable, sociopathic self-interest, was driving any element of the strategizing of whether to produce immunizations or not? I'm not saying this is the case. I'm asking, what if it just wasn't in the self-interest of these organizations that are the big pharma to produce immunizations fast enough to stop COVID-19? Would that be then a guarantee of mutations of COVID-19? And would that be a guarantee of profit in the future, creating ever more future immunizations? We're not saying that that's what happened. We're saying, does it make sense that self-interest and profit motive in our world is generating echoes, domino effects, disruption, turbulence, misunderstanding, discontinuities of effort? So if these effects, these domino effects of non-communication, non-cooperation, non-conscious collaboration, non-orchestrated dysfunction are going on, and they create ever more potential dysfunction, are we looking at a house of cards dynamic for our economic systems, our ecological systems, our social systems, and our technology infrastructure, and our governmental process? We hope that that's not the case, and we are simply wanting to call this out as a necessary key core element of climate change resolution, because if we don't deal with this, how are we going to work together in a sustainable way in the future if resources are diminished, And if there are ever more pressures on nations as climate change issues unfold, and we're literally required to put out ever more fires on a consistent basis. The last element of this slide is the metaphor of the boiled frog. If you put a, metaphorically speaking, if you put a frog in boiling water, it'll generally try to escape from the pain of the boiling water. If you put it in warm water and raise the temperature of the water gradually, you may just boil the frog before it recognizes its situation is changing to the point of its destruction. This relatively sociopathic, self-interest driven approach to decision making and strategizing globally is seen in many different dimensions. In particular, in the competitive dynamics of tribe and in nation-centric decision making and profit-focused for-profit organizational dynamics. And it can be very gradual. It can be one decision at a time that is just a little off, a little non-supportive, a little uncaring, that culminates in a very large macro issue, such as we're seeing with climate change. We'd say that climate change is the unfoldment of this seemingly justified and justifiable self-interest driven approach to decision making in every aspect of human life and at all scales. So we feel that it's worthy of commenting on, because if we don't understand it, we won't be able to transform it, evolve out of it, raise above it in consciousness, and make more wise decisions, reharmonize with the planet and each other, and generate a sustainable life process for humanity, as well as resolve climate change. Human life is often seen as a bunch of fragmented moments. It's recorded in our systems as such, events, decisions, experiences that are then referenced in a sort of digitized or digital way, a fragmented, segmented discontinuity rather than a continuity of integrated consciousness and understanding. Human beings often look at the world in these very fragmented ways from a dualistic vantage point of right, wrong, good, bad, true, false, safe, unsafe, now, past, or present, or future. And us versus them, of course. And of course, genders, male versus female. So these fragmented views are not systemically informed. They're not a process of understanding the flow of the world in all and its evolutionary dynamics, and thus they can't generate healthy perspectives that generate sustainable solutions, because we're trying to competitively fragment everything into this for-profit mode and short-term profit motivation windows that can't take into account the long-term life cycle of any species or of any ecological system or of any nation or any people or tribe. So the social movement, what we call the social movement engine, which is a technology infrastructure to allow any nation, any culture, any organization, any group of people, or any existing social movement to meet in a unifying and synthesizing online environment to talk out the differences of perspective, to get to know each other, to understand each other, to learn to operate collaboratively rather than competitively, to arrive at shared strategies and solutions and implementation paths globally, and that would allow consortiums of nations, consortiums of organizations, as well as consortiums of social movements and cultures to work together harmoniously. That venue doesn't exist in this moment. Currently, the internet is itself a fragmented environment with many different platforms that are non-integrative, non-synthesizing, and therefore they don't give us a systemic view of the world to operate from, to work with collectively, and to to make wise decisions from that will be sustainable in the present moment and generate sustained ecologically and economically and socially sustainable solutions in the future. And so there is no synthesizing system and organizing principle that is globally extensible in this moment. And that's why we want to build the social movement engine with all of its capacities to logistically distribute solutions and resources anywhere in the world that they're needed in order to transform the world. Because what's occurring now doesn't work. It won't work. It'll become less functional if we continue on this path. Therefore, we must be able to have a venue in order to design and define a new path for humanity and then to deploy it in the world in a well-orchestrated way that's efficient and effective based upon available technologies and resources. And it is our intention to build that and to offer that venue to humanity, and we can use it as it wishes through its own collaborative and democratic approaches rather than competitive. And it's that lack of overview, that lack of completeness of information, that lack of accuracy of information that tends to misinform individuals and collectives, and we wish to resolve that as succinctly as it's possible with existing technologies. So and make this also an educational delivery system so that people can learn in sync, evolve in sync, operate in sync, and transform the world in a synchronized and orchestrated way. And in our present moment of divisiveness, social media being used to divide people rather than to unite and mobilize them, to create dysfunction and discontinuity of perspective rather than to arrive at shared values, goals, dreams, and intentions that are healthy and sustainable, where we want to turn that existing competition and profit-based paradigm around and do so in the very near future, because we only have 8 years to cut 45% of carbon emissions in our world. We're not going to do that competitively. We're not going to do that in a non-unified way. And therefore, I need some system to help us unify ourselves. And our current systems are so fragmented and non-integrated that they will not support such a globally orchestrated, necessary development and evolutionary path for our species.